All right, everybody. Welcome into the Bare Knuckle Recovery Podcast, episode number 4. So like Nate and I have talked about before, we have a special guest today. His name is Sergeant Mark Gerardo. Sergeant now,
yes,
correct?
Correct.
For now.
Yeah. Mark Gerardo's good.
So Mark Gerardo with the Fort Wayne Police Department. If you follow our Facebook page or our Instagram or anything like that, you've definitely seen at least a few videos with the three of us. You may have seen Nate's story where they did the documentary with Nate and Sergeant Gerardo, explaining how they met and just kind of what that relationship has turned into now. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. For those of you who hate listening to me talk, this is probably going to be a great episode for you because they're both going to talk most of the time, and I'm just going to ask a question here.
Probably mostly Mark is going to talk.
Yeah.
Because you know I hate to talk.
He's a man of few words, which you'll definitely see once we get into this. Yeah. But before we do that, one of the things that I don't want to speak for Nate, but one of my favorite things that I get to do today is working with law enforcement and first responders. That's definitely something that I never thought I would be doing. And I'm sure you could probably say the same.
No, not in this capacity. I thought I'd be working with them in the sense of trying to get out of the charges that I was about to catch.
Exactly.
By trying to slip them a $100 bill, which usually didn't go very well. But working in an official capacity, no, I did not predict those things to happen.
Nope, not at all. We probably wouldn't have been very good friends with you.
Yeah,
back in the day,
I imagine,
because you weren't very cool. So
and you would have been my problem, and I used to see all problems as nails. And
you're the hammer,
and I just wanted to be the hammer.
There you go.
And if I needed extra hammers to come back me up, because you guys are kind of big, other hammers would have showed up with me.
Yeah,
electric hammers.
Well, my dad coached high school football when I was in high school, and he would always say, "Be the hammer, not the nail."
Yep,
because the nail always gets pounded on.
It does.
So we a hammer and a hammer meeting.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So, anyways, Mark, can you just tell us like a little bit about your background? One of the other things, sorry, real quick. When we do a lot of community events and things like that. As you guys know, we go and speak at a lot of schools and things like that. And Mark comes with us for those things all the time. It's something that he's very passionate about. And one of the things that we definitely love about him is his willingness to be out in the community and share his story and just kind of talk about, his experience with law enforcement, as a first responder, working with people in active addiction, and just kind of his views on that just in general. So if you could just give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you got into this field, and then we'll kind of get into how you and Nate became acquaintances.
So right out of high school, I went in the military, and I spent several years there, and then I got out of active duty, went to the Guard, became a police officer. And, I've told this story before, which is, I'm very type A personality. I kind of got a soapbox that I'm on a lot. I'm very opinionated, and I tend to stick by my guns about things. And in the beginning, when I first became a police officer, being a type A, and I cared about people, I thought I was going to solve all the problems. So I really came in it with an unrealistic view of, hey, I can go out and catch all these bad guys, and I'm going to change, the world, make it a better place, because that's what I wanted to do. What I found out quickly is that I spent most of my time dealing with 10% of the people of the population that are having their very worst day. I wasn't dealing with a lot of people, I don't want to say good people, but people who weren't having problems. And it was causing me some issues as far as like I felt like I was kind of losing a battle with myself, like I wasn't solving a lot of problems. I was putting a lot of people in jail. I put a lot of bad guys in jail, people that deserve to be in jail, but as time went on, and I've told you guys, and I've spoke about this before, I was putting some people in jail that I started to feel like, well, maybe jail wasn't solving the problem.
Yeah.
And it took me a while, and there was quite a process for that, and it took several years. So one of the things I did as a police officer, I always wanted to be doing the coolest, fastest, most dangerous thing. So the first thing I did was join the SWAT team. And I spent 10 years on SWAT, and then 8 of it as a sniper observer. And then also during that time, I thought, it'd be a good idea to go become an undercover narcotics detective, because that would be fun too. Grow long hair and do interesting stuff, and that gets really dangerous. So I did that for several years, and one of the things that was a primary job at the time, we don't see as much of it as now, the way we used to do it, was there was a lot of street walking prostitutes. So I would come across these ladies all the time, and my job was to pick them up and arrest them for prostitution.
Did you say there's not as much of that now?
There's not as much, like they don't walk the street like the old school way where they'd walk up and down like Broadway and D-Wall.
Is that because it's so obvious?
Well,
and
it's obvious.
It's
and
online now, right?
It's all multimedia. So
Yeah.
everything is done online. I mean, you guys know the drug market. It's almost all online.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, all of it.
Well,
we're not
Backpage, remember? It wasn't Backpage. Was the big
Backpage was
thing.
huge.
Yeah, that was big for a long time.
Yep. They had a lot of websites that you could go to and just order up a girl.
Awful.
And so in this process, I kept arresting them and we'd let them out. You know, your first one's a misdemeanor, your second one's a misdemeanor, third one's a felony. And I'm like, this isn't really solving the problem. But the other thing I started noticing that every single one of them were substance abusers.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as
pay for whatever their drug of choice was.
It was it.
Yeah.
So I started getting more interested in like kind of what made them tick. Like I wanted to solve a problem. And I started talking to them more and I'd ask them how they got to where they were at. And unfortunately for these women, as you know, when they were 10, 12 years old, their idea was not to become a stripper or a prostitute. Bad things happened to them.
Yeah.
And then it created like the things you taught me, like, you know, there's a mental issue that's taking place that drives the alcohol and the drug addiction. And it wasn't just, you know, okay, I like to party and now I'm going to have a problem. This was like something driven from deep-seated, like soul-wrenching, crushing damage that had been done to them. It's usually child molest. So then, you know, two other things that I thought was significant that happened in my career. When I was undercover, I used to hang out at the strip clubs a lot and everybody gets a laugh out of that. But really it wasn't any more than I needed to have somebody vouch for me if I was going to buy drugs from drug dealers. A lot of drug dealers hang out at strip clubs. So the girls, I'd become friends with them and then they would vouch for me. And then the drug dealer, he wouldn't look at me like, he might be a cop. They're like, he's friends with a stripper. Ain't no way he's a cop. And then I'd buy dope from them. So from the drug dealer. But the girls would talk to me and I'd ask them questions. And same thing as my prostitutes, child abuse. You know, somebody had damaged them at an early age, usually molestation, and they were just in a bad spot themselves. And I really started kind of having a heart for these people. Like, I'm like, okay, everybody knows what's right and wrong, but there's some damage here that they just never were taught or were able to fix other than with drugs and alcohol. So then fast forward, I start working with the FBI in human trafficking. And we start a program here in Fort Wayne. A lot of people didn't know about it, but it kind of went national. We had a way of doing things where we'd go out and we changed our view, like a paradigm shift in law enforcement, which was we stopped looking at the women as who we wanted arrested, who was bringing the women to us.
Yeah.
So who were the pimps, right? I mean, I even have a whole PowerPoint still on my phone. It's called Pimp Takedowns. And we would teach this course with the FBI and we'd go around the state of Indiana and then we'd come back later and set up stings like up in the region, Elkhart, that area. You know, you have a major highway, I think it's I-94, runs between Chicago and Detroit. There's a lot of women trafficked along there. And then like during the Kentucky Derby down in southern Indiana, we would have, you know, a lot of prostitution across state lines. Well, the beauty of being with the FBI is if you bring a girl across state lines for the purpose of prostitution, that falls under what's called the Mann Act. And that's an automatic 5-year hit. Like you're going to federal prison doing 5 years. And then anything else we can stack on there, like if you got priors for other stuff, the Fed system's a little different than state system.
Yeah, sure.
So I started talking to these girls and then we started busting these pimps. And it really, what I noticed was when I went to teach other cops about this program is they all kind of sneered at me in a way like I was one of them and they liked me because I was a SWAT guy and I was undercover and, you know, I'd done some high speed stuff and that kind of gives you some credibility with other police officers. But the biggest thing I noticed was they still looked at everything was a nail.
Yeah.
And they looked at these girls that way. And then, you know, I always had a speech I gave them. I go, think of your daughter at 10 years old, 12 years old, your niece, your nephew, you know, somebody you really care about. I go, do you think that they're right now thinking, hey, I'm going to be a stripper or a prostitute and be, you know, completely submerged in dope and alcohol to solve these problems? No, nobody starts off life thinking that's my aspirations. I want to become that. And you start to humanize the person and you start using more empathy when you looked at them. And it's not like, oh, she's a prostitute, go to jail.
So you just said empathy. That's what's been going through my head this whole time you've been telling this story, is the sense of empathy that you developed over the years. Is that something that you expected?
No. I mean, I always did. I cared about people. It's why I became a police officer. I really did want to help. I think that's true for most police officers. They took the job because they want to help society and they want to help people. But for me, it kind of kept, I wasn't seeing the problem fix. It just kept getting worse. Right. And like you guys both know, and I love this story with you guys is you just tell it how it is. And you're like, yeah, look, when I'm on dope, I flipped dope so I could get dope, beat up people, whatever it was, you were doing all these things that wasn't you.
Right.
And that's what
absolutely.
We try to tell people all the time is the person before dope and the person after dope, they are not the same person.
Yeah. People do bad things and they get in bad situations, but they're not necessarily bad people.
Correct.
They're good people doing bad things is
That's
really
it.
what they are.
It is. And, I know sometimes cops are like, tree hugger, you're just making excuses for
Hug
them.
a thug.
Yeah, hug a thug. And I'm like, I get it. Like, I understand, the culture of police work. But I do believe, and I said this, my story to the people, to the police officers, when I started having this paradigm shift in my own thinking was I spent all these years trying to solve all the problems. And I started thinking, because I was becoming frustrated over the years, I started thinking, well, and of course, being native talked a lot about this, about what's in my sphere of influence. And we actually had a case, and this kind of was like the final nail in all of it that really it was the switch that went on in my head, like, okay, this is what it's about.
Right.
At the end of the day, this is really what it's about. And I can remember there was a 17-year-old girl. She basically got hijacked off of social media. She was having a bad day. Ran away from home. And there was a person that was a predator and got her. And I'm not going to talk about it on this podcast, but if you can think of the most horrible thing that can happen to a young girl, it was happening on a daily basis to get her to prostitute. Not only that, but that person who took her was also like social media smart. So they had already seen she had brothers, she had a family, and they threatened to kill the family and the brothers if she ever tried to get away or call the police.
Well, I want to point out too that a lot of people that get sucked into these situations, like young girls, many times they struggle with the same things people do that start using drugs, right? Like They have self-esteem issues, they have depression, they maybe don't feel like they fit in.
Yes.
So they prey on that, like, hey, I'll take care of you. Oh, well, we can be friends.
Yeah.
Oh, I understand.
Yes.
Yeah, like let's meet up at the mall. I just think it's always important to highlight that that's how people get in those situations sometimes. It's not that this girl was, people say, oh, she's some promiscuous, out looking for trouble. No, she was just having a bad day, like you said, probably having a tough life, struggled with some mental health issues potentially, but self-esteem for sure.
Yeah.
And people prey on that. Same thing with drugs, right? Like, so there's those parallels there. I always like to point those out. People that struggle with substance use and people that are continuously victimized by predators.
Yes. And predators are really smart. Like they see weakness. And I always say it's just like big lions hunting gazelle. They look for the one with the limp, or the one having a bad day, not paying attention, and they become food.
Yep.
So the biggest part about this with this girl, which it was really sad for me because she was telling her story, and she had been basically, I think she'd been in this captive situation with this guy for like a year, 17 years old, just being driven from state to state, dirty hotel to dirty hotel. And, but she was out. And we got her out. We arrested the guy, and we got her back to her family. And I started thinking immediately, I was like, this is it. This is the solution to my problem. If I just spent 25 years as a police officer and we saved this one girl, was not my career worth all of that?
Right.
Was it worth it to her family that I spent 25 years banging my head against a wall, and then we got this one out? So for me, it became this almost like a marching order for me was, what about the one? I'm not trying to save everybody anymore. If I can just get to one person and help one person, and then fast forward, that was me and you.
Yeah, that leads in perfectly to how you and Nate met. And I love it when you guys tell this story together and just kind of go back and forth. So that's what I think you should do. I think Nate, you guys have heard Nate tell his story, or if you've ever been to any events or anything like that. I mean, Nate and I have probably told our stories, I don't know how many times, in Allen County and Kosciuszko County, but just the very end of your story, you talk about how you just went and bought some dope from this guy that sold one of your friends who overdosed and passed away, a bag of dope, got it from him. You went into the house, and I'll let you tell the story, but just the end of your story, just tell that part.
Yeah. So it was 2017, and I was at the end of my rope, was living in my car and all that stuff. And it was terrible. Had been through a lot. You guys have heard my story before. But they were cutting fentanyl into everything. And that was really part of the problem, was the fentanyl was in everything now. And I knew that, but the guy that I was using before got raided. And so then I had this new Connect that I was using, and his stuff was a little different. And ultimately what ended up happening is it had fentanyl cut into it. So I bought some of his, what I thought was mostly heroin. I knew it was strong, but I thought it was mostly heroin, right? And I went back to this house that I was staying at, which I was really, if I remember correctly at the time, I was no longer truly welcome there, but I like went inside to take a shower or whatever, use the bathroom, and went in, used it. And I just remember waking up, and the door was smashed into 20 pieces. And, I'm laying there on the floor, and there's firefighters and EMTs looking at me, and they were like, dude, you overdosed. You're pretty much dead. And we brought you back. So, I get out, and they take me to the hospital. They throw me on a stretcher, take me to the hospital. And, I'm very remorseful in the moment, like everybody is. And I'm like, oh no, terrible. I'm so sorry. But then when I get to the hospital, of course, now like I'm sick, because when they give you Narcan, you go into instant withdrawal. So I'm sick, and I'm laying there, and, they want me to stay, but I don't want to stay. So what I actually did was I ate some food, got a meal in me. And then I decided to leave against medical advice. So I signed out AMA from the hospital, and went back to the same drug dealer after I got back to my car, and bought the same drugs, went back to the same house, and locked myself in the bedroom this time. And they had to kick down that door. And then they found me in the bathroom in the bedroom, and brought me back again. And I remember the first responders were sitting there looking at me, and they were like, dude, you're not going to make it. And I think it was some of the people on the same shift. I don't know if they were all in the same shift, but it was some of the same people as before. And one of the things to remember too, like during that time, that was 2016 to 2017. That was, remember, when we had that huge spike, because I think 2016 was, we had like 68 overdose deaths.
Yeah.
And then I think in 2017, it was like 127. So they almost doubled.
Yeah, almost doubled that year.
So
and
that's
fentanyl was, at that time, it was going from a cut agent to almost being the only agent.
Yeah. It was almost like you couldn't even find heroin anymore. But like that moment, so that's when that happened throughout that year. But like in the beginning of the year, there was still like that heroin. There was probably some heroin in there. There probably was. But that, so like initially when they were cutting it in, they were doing a pretty good job of making sure that it was, they had it down, like whatever part fentanyl and then like 20 parts this and 10 parts this. They had it down pretty well, where it was pretty good stuff for a while. But then they got greedy, or they got lazy, probably more lazy than anything. They're not very smart to begin with, and started cutting it every which way. And that's when I got, this stuff. And I had overdosed times before that, but the times I overdosed before that, it was like clearly fentanyl. Like there was this stuff going around on the street that was like this orange color. Yeah. Well, there was like one that was like white orange. There was like one that was white purple. Like I don't know how they got the colors.
What I always saw.
I don't know. I don't think they know.
Yeah.
They just start throwing stuff together. Good enough. So anyway, like I overdosed, and like, there was a bunch of people overdosing at this time. And like, as Tommy said, one of my good friends had just overdosed and died from the same drugs and the same dealer. And I had known multiple people that had overdosed on this batch. And so this was my second overdose in 24 hours. And they were just sitting there, and they told me, they said, you're not going to make it a third time. Like there's no way, you're lucky these 2 times that you didn't die. And I just was like, I was like, I don't really care.
Don't come next time.
I was like, just quit showing up. I was like, I hate going to the hospital. I hate getting revived. I hate waking up with everybody looking at me. Like if I don't wake up, then all my problems are over. Like I don't have to worry about it. And you said that about your story too.
Absolutely.
Like you knew that if you got shot and killed, and you did get shot, that it would just be done, and it could be over for you. Like the pain would be gone. Because honestly, at the end of the day, like when you're that far in your addiction, you just want the pain to stop. Yeah. You're not even getting high anymore. You just want the pain to stop, and all the trauma you've gone through at that point to get to where you're at. Like, even if you're not traumatized in the beginning, by that time you've gone through so much crap, and you're so miserable that like, if you die, that's actually a relief. Like I can't count the number of times leading up to that moment where I would be driving down the street and see a tree.
Oh yeah.
And be like, I could just cross the center line easy and smash my car and be dead.
Sad.
Because I just never thought it was going to end. And in that moment, I felt the same way. Like these people were like, oh, you don't have to live this way. And I was like, BS. Like, come on. Like, dude, I've been to rehab like 5 times, 7 times, whatever it was at that point, and I was just done. Like, I just didn't care. And
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, then they kind of were like, all right, well, we don't know what to do with you, so we're going to call somebody else.
Yeah. So at that time, you remember what time of the day this was?
It was like around 5 or 6 p.m. It was in the evening.
I'm trying to remember what shift I was working because I was on my way home. So it was in the evening, and I thought it was closer to, I think the time I worked 10 to 6.
Okay.
So it was probably right around 6 o'clock.
You're probably right. That's what I about remember. Yeah.
So during this time, while, Nate just overdosed for the second time in 24 hours, got another door broken down in this person's house.
Poor
and the
girl.
Paramedics and firefighters or whoever it is were there talking to him. What are you doing?
So it was kind of interesting because I was just on my way home, and just like Nate said, on the other side of the coin from the law enforcement view is we were seeing these every day. Like we were having 3 to 5, 6, 7, sometimes overdoses in a day. So in the narcotics division, we were going to a lot of them, and we were like basically at the time some of it was, hey, let's go there. They're coming out of being, they're surviving a dope overdose. Sometimes they talk to us. We'll figure out who the dealers are because we were already shifting gears as far as just like with the prostitutes, we weren't as big a hurry to arrest somebody who had a drug
taking
habit.
these people to jail over and over again.
It wasn't working. In fact, it was work. They'd get out and then all of a sudden they'd go on a binger or whatever because they were locked up for a few days. And then they're just, doubling down, coming out, and then it's just overdose again. So we actually were seeing that this wasn't solving problems either. But there was a second thing that was going on. And I always forget the term, and usually you guys remember it. But there was an actual, it's like a syndrome for first responders, which is they were
compassion fatigue.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Compassion fatigue. And they were just watching people like Nate and you overdose. And for somebody who doesn't have an addiction, you're like, it's hard to understand. You just put your hand on a hot stove and you got burned.
Yeah. What the hell is this guy doing?
Why are you putting your hand back on the stove and you're leaving it on longer the second time?
Yep.
Like it defied some kind of rationale because we weren't properly educated, not through anybody's fault, because it was a new phenomenon to us that we just didn't understand how powerful this opiate addiction was. Like you just don't, I understood it better because I have a science background, but it was hard to understand for most people, not that they weren't smart or not capable. We just didn't have any of the tools and we weren't even talking about it. We're just like, holy cow, we're getting the crap kicked out of us out on the street and it's pulling all these resources, every day. So anyway,
well, and I wanted to say too, a lot of people in active use are not the most fun to deal with when you Narcan them either.
Yeah.
No.
They're usually pissed off.
Yeah.
And they're like, dude, I would always tell people and when I would Narcan other people, I would say, dude, I was fine. They're like, dude, you were blue. You're not fine.
That's a lot nicer than what I always said to people when I would wake up.
Well, because you remember just being high and then you get Narcan. You're like, what are you doing? 2 seconds ago, they're like, that was 5 minutes ago, bro. You've been laying on the floor gasping for air.
Yeah. And it's weird because the Narcan thing, when I first learned about Narcan and I'd used it, one of the very first times we got sent to a hotel room, I remember some guy laying on the floor and he was all blue and then he was doing, what's called agonal breathing, which is a lot of times if you have a severe gunshot wound, you're dying. It's like your body's shutting down.
Yeah.
It's like your brain trying to save you, but it can't.
Right.
So you do this weird sounding agonal breathing and this guy was doing it and I hit him with the Narcan and his eyes came wide open. He was instantly better and he took a swing at me because he confused, didn't know where he was.
Yeah.
Which was the first thing I thought of when I went to meet Nate because I'm like, oh, this isn't your average druggie. He's a big boy. And I'm like, man, and I waited for everybody to leave. Because I wanted to have a one-on-one conversation
so just back up a few minutes. So you were on your way home.
Yes.
Right. You were on your way home from work, going home to eat dinner with your wife or whatever you were going to do. I think you said you already took your vest off.
I was starting to unbutton the sides because, you wear this thing all day. It's tight when we wear them. So I'm kind of unbuckling it. I'm just kind of getting comfortable in the car, getting ready to strip it all off when I get home. And somebody called and they said, hey, take a look at this run on the screen. And I'm talking to my wife and she's like, well, dinner's on the table. And I'm like, I'm probably no more than 5 to 10 minutes from home. I'm past where Nate is at in this
You're
house.
probably hungry.
And I'm hungry and I'm tired and I'm burnt out.
Right.
And it was kind of taking a toll on me because, again, like I said, I do care about people and watching them suffer like that over and over and over. It's hard to watch. So I don't know. I'll say it 1,000 times, whether they want me to say it or not. I feel like it's the one time I really felt like God had an intervention with me. I really felt like I didn't hear a voice, but something said, hey, you need to go to this. Everything in me said, go home and eat dinner and call it a day. I can walk away from an overdose. I'm allowed to. That's my discretion. And of course, I was on my way home and this is months. I've been doing this for months going to overdose. And I'm like, what's one more? And so I told my wife, I said, hey, I don't understand this. I said, but something's telling me I need to go to this. She's like, go to what? And I tell her about it. And she goes, well, if you think somebody's telling you or God's talking to you, you need to go. So I'm like, roger that. So buckle the vest back up, do a U-turn in the middle of the road. I remember I was on North Clinton, heading up towards North Point Woods in that area, kind of going up towards Wallen Road. And I did a flip around up there and I came back and just sat down with Nate. When I came into the house, I stood by, didn't say nothing, watched all the medics clean all their crap up, all their little, EKG pads and
I remember you
spent Narcan things. And I just stand in the corner and wait for them to all leave.
I remember.
You thought you were going to jail, huh?
Yeah. I remember I was sitting on the couch and I was on the one end and you sat down on the other end. You didn't say anything. You just turned your radio off.
Yeah.
And you just kind of like nodded at me and let everybody keep going about what they were doing.
Yeah.
You just watched them kind of go. And then I think you introduced yourself and we started talking.
Yeah, that was it. And it was, again, like, I'm always curious, like, how does somebody get to this point? Like I'm still searching for the answer to solving these problems, with now the idea that I can't save everybody, but what if I can just get to one person? And, I introduced him. I told him I was a uniformed narcotics detective. And I'm like, hey, I'm Detective Gerardo. And, I'm analyzing to see how he's doing, like, mentally. Is there going to be a fight? And, Nate, what I really liked about Nate is that, when you sit down with somebody and they're being very honest, like they're not putting up walls, because I'm the cops. And I even told, I said, hey, I know I'm the cops. And I go, I just want you to know I'm not here to arrest you. Like, I could care less. I said, I don't care about the drugs. I don't care if there's drugs laying around. I don't care about needles. I said, really, what I just want to do is just talk to you. And I remember asking him, I'm like, how old are you? And he's like, I'm 23. And basically it came out, he's like, I don't care whether I live or die. And I've told this story, like, God, I always sometimes I hate saying it because I don't, I'm the guy in uniform. I'm not supposed to be a wuss about this stuff, but like, it really was for me, it was really sad to hear somebody, I'm looking at a grown man that has a life ahead of him or should have one. And he's telling me he doesn't care whether he lives or dies. And, again, I told you, I was a soldier and I've been a police officer all these years. I've seen horrible things. I've seen dead kids, dead adults. I've seen the worst in humanity. What humanity is capable of doing, and I suck it up and I move on pretty much every day. But there was something about talking to Nate that day where, as a full-grown man, it almost made me want to cry. Like, I couldn't understand how life could be just so cheap and easy to give away when you had so much ahead of you, or potential. You had all this potential. So we had a great conversation, and I found out he had parents that really cared about him. There was a guy, Mickey Ashpole. You guys work with him now. And he used to be at a place called Water's Edge. And I felt like they had a good program. It was insurance driven. So, you had to have some insurance to get there. And I called Mickey on the phone, got a hold of Nate's dad. Nate's dad's like, I have this insurance. We got all the policy numbers and all the, logistics over it. And then off Nate goes within 24 hours. He's on a plane to a rehab center in Florida. And that would have been cool enough for me. Like, I was pretty happy about that when I left. But I'd given Nate my phone number, or I think I gave it. I think he called Mickey first.
Yeah, you gave it to Mickey.
And Mickey asked if you could have my phone number. And I'm like, yeah, give it to him. So I get a call from Nate partway into his, treatment. And he's like, hey, Detective Gerardo. He goes, I just want you to know I'm doing really good. I'm like, I got off the phone. I remember I was at home and I told my wife, she goes, who was that? And I was like, oh, that's Nate. And I said, Nate Mollering from that incident the other night. And she goes, well, what'd he say? And I said he's doing good. And I was like, I was super happy about it. Like, I'm okay. We're on a good path here.
Right.
And I thought, I'll get the one and done. Like, sometimes I'll have people check back in with me and be like, hey, I'm doing good. And then I never hear from him again. Yeah. And Nate kept calling me.
Yeah. I remember that.
So the best part about, I think, me and Nate's story is I come from a family of cops. I'm part of cop culture in a lot of ways. I believe in what we do. I sometimes think we can do better, because we all can. Nobody's perfect.
Sure.
But one of the things that I've always amazed me, and now with you as well, Tommy, which is, one, I love your guys' story. And I tell people, I don't love it for the tragedy or the trauma that you went through. I love it because it's the redemption in it. Like, you were both at places like your life for you somehow was over. Like, inside of you, if it was left up to you, there would be no more you.
Right.
And, so the two big things that I got out of that is, one, me and Nate become friends, which I'm just telling people out there, cops and criminals don't become friends. They rarely, if ever. It happens. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's not a very common event,
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, so me and Nate become friends, and then, and then I meet you, of course, and I hear your story, and how I love you to tell your story, because as a cop, like, sad, but kind of awesome at the same time. And, So, but the secondary part of our story, me and Nate's story, and for me, so that was great for a year, this going on with Nate. I was happy about that, but I was still kind of broke. I was still seeing a lot of tragedy on the streets. Nate's getting better. That's a positive. And I think God knew better, and he knew that I needed something out of that as well. And what he gave me, and it took me a year to figure it out, because sometimes I'm kind of slow. But what I really got out of it is that it was a win.
Yeah.
Like, I had to sit and think about this, and I went back to, and it was weird. Then all of a sudden, the story of my 17-year-old girl that had been trafficked and Nate, it didn't matter whether it was prostitution or drugs or whatever it is, this brokenness in our fellow man. If you put the effort into it, you can save some people. And then from that, when I look at you two guys, like, this is what's even more amazing is God was playing a game of chess. I was playing like checkers.
Yeah.
And he had such a bigger plan for it. And the bigger plan is that now you guys go out and you help people.
Yeah.
And you and I both know, Nate tells me this all the time. You and I don't talk about as much, Tommy, but Nate tells me about all the funerals he goes to.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard on us. And we have to go have coffee and have a lunch, right? And we talk about this because I see tragedy all the time. You see tragedy, and that has a weight and a toll on our soul.
Yeah,
it does.
Absolutely.
And if you don't rationalize it properly, that's why cops tend to be alcoholics. We have a lot of divorce and alcoholism in police work, and it's because they don't understand that they're traumatized.
Right.
They get, I mean, I hate to, throw PTSD out there, but really it is some kind of brain trauma.
Yeah,
it is.
Seeing this awfulness in humanity day in and day out, and then they suffer for it. And then it doesn't work. But in this group, and my last thing I can say about it is the only way we start solving the problem is if it's input from all sides.
Yeah.
It can't be just the police or the firefighters or the medics or you guys. As a team working at this from all angles, that seems to have been the best process. And that, in my experience, even cleaning up like a bad apartment complex that's got a lot of gangs and drugs, police can't come and clean it up for them. But if I get management, and then I get the maintenance guys, and then I get the cops, and we all work together as a team, we can fix problems.
Right.
To me, that's the biggest lesson one of the biggest lessons that came out of this. As a team, we can start solving some problems. And we're not going to save everybody, but we're probably saving a lot more than if we'd have done nothing.
Right. And I think it's always important to remember, like you talked about in the beginning, we can only control the things around us, right? Like we can only control our own action, our own attitudes.
That's it.
So that's why I always tell people, like, start in your community, get involved. And if you're in a small town, you're like, well, how could we ever impact the world? You can. You should just start with the people around you that you touch every day, and that's how you make big change happen, is through a bunch of small changes,
Correct.
So I always tell people, just focus on what you can control. Don't worry about, obviously it's important to vote, but don't worry about the election, who's going to get elected, this, that, and the other. What's this world power doing, that world power? All we can control is what we can control, right?
Correct.
And if we focus on the people that we touch every day, then hopefully they'll do the same thing, and it's a domino effect, right?
It is.
And that's the ripples of what we do, and that's
Correct.
the ripples of what you talk about, the one,
that's
right?
It.
And so we may be the one or the two of people in recovery, but you can be the one as a police officer. You're the one who's different than that, and then we just keep going, and we have all these people who are different, and they're outliers, but then they affect the next people going forward. And then we have this huge impact that we never thought and if we never took those steps in the first place, then we would never be where we are, and we would never go any further. Right.
Right.
I mean,
and if we don't do it, the opposite is true. So the bad or the evil in the world, it domino effects too. It started with one person on an M30 blue pill, right. And then they go out and then they're stealing and robbing and prostituting and doing whatever, because they got to get the drugs. And then that domino effect keeps going.
Right.
So we're always in this, I think since the beginning of time, we've just been in this process where, it's a cliche, but it's also true, which, the only thing it takes for evil to exist is for good men and women to do nothing.
Exactly.
One of the things, I know you got to go soon, and we could sit here and talk about this forever, but one of the things that I was thinking about on my way here today was what you guys were just talking about, was that domino effect. What if you would have went home that day? If you wouldn't have turned around in the middle of Clinton and went and saw Nate, and I mean, who knows what would have happened had you not done that today? He might not be sitting here today.
The what if is pretty huge.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you did.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I was go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know how important that was for you
to
have a police officer sit down and ask you, what is going on? Like, how did you get to this point instead of trying to arrest you, which he certainly could have done. Yeah. No one would have blamed him.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, the thing you always talk about too is you don't just save the person, you save their family, right? You solve theft from Walmart, you solve DCS cases, we solve lost productivity when that person dies in our economy. Like, you know, there's the human impact and there's the financial impact and there's this whole world impact that we don't always think about. You know, we see these numbers of overdose deaths, you know, and we're like, wow, that's a big number. But you take that number, you multiply it by 10 or 20 because that's the real impact.
Correct.
When that person dies.
It's like a bomb. It makes an explosion, then you have all this collateral damage around it. Like I learned that with your family. Like here you had this good family and they were praying for you all the time and they were devastated by your actions.
Right.
And when it fixed, like, wow, like to see the change, like it almost like it was a healing for the whole family. Right. So we weren't just solving Nate Mollering's issue. We were helping everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why we always tell people, you know, don't give up. And somebody's talking about, you know, God has a plan, but it's on us to carry it out. You can have this plan all day and this will, but you know, even God doesn't mess with free will.
That's right.
If we don't do our part, then the plan doesn't matter.
That's it.
You know, we have to carry that out. God only helps those who help themselves.
That's it.
Right. You know, so I think that's important to remember. And, you know, that thing that we all are afraid to do. I always tell people, Tommy, I talk about this all the time, just do it. You know, like when we started this and when you started doing the stuff you were doing with the prostitutes and the drug addicts and everybody like that, you didn't know if it was going to work. I'm sure it was a little bit scary too, but you just did it. But you learn as you go. If you wait till you're going to be ready, that's what I always tell people.
Be ready.
If you're never going to be ready.
There's never a perfect moment to start being an advocate or to start getting involved or to start doing that thing, affecting that change, start that nonprofit, whatever you're going to do, or extend that hand. There's never a perfect time. You keep waiting. It's just going to pass you by. And then,
that's it.
Then you have regret, and regret is one of the worst things.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Well, it is a little after 1:30. We know you have to get to work, but thank you very much for being here today. We always appreciate your time. Love hanging out with you.
We'll have you back.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
So next episode, number 5, we will have another guest with us. I believe it's scheduled for next week. So hopefully we'll have that out to you guys soon. As always, thank you for all the likes and follows, and thank you guys for listening.